The black mask, the throwing stars, the silent killer who drops from the rafters, cuts a throat, and vanishes into a puff of smoke. None of it is real. The figure you picture the moment you hear the word ninja was invented on a Japanese theater stage around the year 1800, more than a century after the last real one had already faded from the battlefield. The truth was buried so well that historians are still digging it out today. And it begins in a range of forested mountains, in villages of farmers who trained in secret and who once did something no one believed possible. They took the field against one of the most powerful warlords in Japanese history, and they beat him. Start with the name because even that is a mistake. Ninja is one way of reading two written characters that a Japanese speaker of the time would almost never have said out loud. The people themselves were called shinobi, from shinobi no mano, meaning something close to one who moves unseen or one who endures. The word is old. It turns up in Japanese poetry more than 1,000 years ago, long before there was any profession attached to it, and back then it meant only this: to steal away, to slip off quietly, to hide what is in your heart. The shinobi were never a secret brotherhood of black-clad killers in matching uniforms. They were something no film has ever shown you, professionals in the oldest business in warfare, information. By the height of Japan's age of civil war, the Sengoku period, when the country tore itself apart for over 100 years, province against province, brother against brother, a shinobi might be sent as a spy, a scout, a saboteur, or an agitator whose whole task was to slip inside enemy walls and spread rumor and panic until the defenders turned on each other. They were organized and they were ranked. At the top sat the jonin, the men who ran the networks and hired their people out to the warlords who paid best. Beneath them, the chunin, who managed the missions. And at the bottom, the genin, the field agents who actually went over the wall in the dark. This was not a legend, it was a trade with a structure, a chain of command, and a price list. And it grew above all in two places: Iga and Koka. Today the areas of Mie and Shiga, rugged mountain valleys a short ride from the old imperial capital of Kyoto. The land there was poor for farming and boxed in by forest and ridge, which turned out to matter enormously. No single great lord bothered to rule such difficult ground, so the villages governed themselves, dozens upon dozens of small fortified family estates bound together into leagues, a kind of self-ruling republic of farmer warriors in the hills. They settled their own disputes, often violently, and generation after generation of that friction sharpened a very particular set of skills: how to move through country unseen, how to get inside a fortified house, how to gather what you needed and be gone before anyone knew you had come. The mountains didn't just hide the shinobi, the mountains made them. Here is the part the movies get most wrong. For a shinobi, the fight was the failure. Their work was espionage, not slaughter. The samurai of the age were bound by a code of honor, and there were jobs that code would not let them touch. Creeping into a rival's compound at night, poisoning a well, burning the supply stores, lying and spying and stabbing men in the back. You do not send a swordsman to do a spy's work any more than you call a swordsman to do a locksmith's. So the lords hired specialists, and the specialist's goal on nearly every mission was the same: get in without being seen, learn the one thing you came to learn, and get back out alive. Kill someone and you leave a body, and a body is a signal that someone was there. The best mission was the one the enemy never even knew had happened, which is why the real uniform of the shinobi was not black. We know this because they wrote it down. In their own surviving manuals, training scrolls compiled in the 1600s, the shinobi describe the art of disguise as the true heart of their craft, and they list 7 standard costumes: the shichi hode, a wandering monk with a deep basket hat that swallowed the whole face; a Buddhist priest who could walk into almost any household and be welcomed. A mountain ascetic, a traveling merchant, a street magician, a wandering entertainer, and plain, ordinary traveling clothes. Every one of these was a person who could move between provinces without raising an eyebrow, pass through the checkpoints on the roads, and stand in a marketplace for hours, watching, without a single soul wondering why. The colors they favored were browns, dull reds, and dark blue, quiet, common shades that let a man vanish into a crowd by day and into shadow by night. The disguise was not something a shinobi put on before the mission. The disguise was the mission. Then there were the tools, and here, too, forget almost everything the films taught you. The real gear was the gear of a burglar and a survivalist, not a fantasy assassin. Climbing claws, iron spikes strapped across the palms, called shuko, and matching ones for the feet, called ashiko, so a shinobi could sink them into wood and rough stone and walk straight up the outside of a wall in the dark. A grappling hook on a long coiled rope for the walls too high to climb. Caltrops, makibishi, small, wickedly spiked pieces of iron, shaped so that, however they fall, one point always lands facing up. A shinobi fleeing in the night would scatter a fistful behind him, and the men chasing in thin straw sandals would drive the spikes into their feet and go down, and the chase would end. There was the kunai, and no, it was not a throwing knife. It was a blunt iron multi-tool for digging, prying open gaps, and cutting through mud walls, ordinary enough that a man could carry one in broad daylight and look like nothing more than a laborer. There was blinding powder, ground pepper, ash, and sand, flung straight into an enemy's eyes to buy the 2 or 3 seconds it took to disappear. And the throwing star, the shuriken, the single most famous ninja weapon in the world. Historians still argue over whether the shinobi even used it much at all, and in the places it does turn up, the points were too short to kill anyone. It could make a man flinch. It could open a shallow cut. It was a distraction thrown to buy an escape, not a weapon of murder. The most iconic thing about the ninja, the little steel star, is very close to a myth, because the real weapon on every mission was always the same. It was getting away clean. Now, because they moved unseen, and because they left almost no trace, the people they preyed on filled the darkness with fear. Villagers whispered that the shinobi could walk across the surface of a river, turn invisible, pass through solid walls, breathe underwater for an hour at a time. And the shinobi did nothing whatsoever to correct them. A reputation like that is armor thicker than any steel. If a warlord truly believes an intruder can melt through stone, he doubles his guards and doubles them again. He starts at every creak of the house. He sleeps badly, eats little, and trusts no one around him. And a frightened, sleepless, suspicious enemy is an enemy already half defeated before a single blade is drawn. The greatest weapon the shinobi ever carried was not in their hands. It was the story people told about them after the lamps went out. Which brings us back to those 2 mountain provinces and to the man who decided they had to be destroyed. His name was Oda Nobunaga, and in the 1500s he was carving his way across Japan, crushing everyone who stood between him and total power, burning whole monasteries full of people who defied him. The self-ruling farmer republics of Iga were exactly the kind of stubborn, ungovernable thing he could not tolerate. So, in the year 1579, his own son led an army into the mountains to stamp them out, around 10,000 trained troops marching against a few thousand defenders who were, on paper, mere farmers. The shinobi did not line up in a field to die. They used the mountains the way they had been trained to use everything, as a tool. They struck in the dark and were gone before the alarm was raised. They ambushed columns in narrow passes where 10,000 men could not bring their numbers to bear. They cut down stragglers, burned supplies, and let the terror do the rest. Nobunaga's son was beaten so badly that his army broke and fled back out of the province. A force of farmers had routed a samurai army, one of the sharpest victories of unconventional warfare over a conventional army in all of Japanese history. But you do not humiliate Oda Nobunaga twice. 2 years later, in 1581, he came back, and this time he came himself. Not 10,000 men, 40 to 50,000 pouring into Iga from 6 directions at once, more soldiers than the entire province had people. There were no clever passes left to hold when the enemy was coming down every road at the same moment, and Nobunaga's answer to a guerrilla war was the one answer guerrillas cannot survive. He did not chase the shinobi through the hills, he erased the hills. Villages, temples, storehouses, fields burned. Of the roughly 90,000 people living in Iga, an estimated 30,000 or more were killed. The self-ruling republic that had shattered an army just 24 months earlier was scraped off the map. The single greatest concentration of shinobi in all of Japan met its end not in a duel in the shadows, but in a whole province turned to ash under the open sun. And yet, this is where the story turns. The survivors who scattered out of those burning valleys would, 1 year later, save the life of the man who went on to rule all of Japan. In 1582, Nobunaga himself was betrayed and killed by one of his own generals at a temple in Kyoto. His most important ally, a lord named Tokugawa Ieyasu, was caught far from home in the open with only a handful of men, and every road back crawling with enemies eager to catch him. His fastest way to safety ran directly through Iga, the very province Nobunaga's family had just put to the torch. By every reasonable measure, it should have been the end of him. Instead, the men of Iga and Koka guided him over the mountains, along hidden tracks known only to them, and brought him home alive. That escape is remembered to this day as the Iga-go, the crossing of Iga. The man who commanded those guides was named Hattori Hanzo, a warrior of Iga blood in the service of the Tokugawa. And he was no shadow-clad phantom out of a comic book. He was a samurai, a battlefield commander, and he rose to one of the higher ranks a retainer could hold. When Tokugawa Ieyasu went on to win the whole of Japan and build his new capital at Edo, the city we now call Tokyo, one of the great gates of his fortress was named in Hanzo's honor. It still carries the name today, the Hanzomon, the Hanzo Gate. There is a subway line running beneath it that bears his name 4 centuries later. Sit with that for a moment. The clan Nobunaga had tried to wipe from the earth, ended up guarding the founder of the dynasty that would rule Japan for the next 250 years. Nor were all of them men. The old accounts describe a woman named Mochizuki Chiyome, tied to the powerful Takeda house, who is said to have trained an entire network of female agents. She placed them as shrine maidens and traveling entertainers, roles that let a woman walk straight into a lord's household, sit quietly at the edge of the room, hear everything, and carry it back out again. How much of her story is hard record, and how much is later legend is still argued over, but the logic behind it is airtight. The disguise nobody thinks to suspect is worth more than any blade ever forged. And then slowly, the world that needed the shinobi disappeared. Ieyasu's heirs finished uniting the country, and a long peace settled over Japan for 2.5 centuries. But a spy is only worth as much as there is to spy on, and with the Great Wars over, the shinobi had less and less to do. The last time they appear in a real war is a rebellion in the 1630s, where Koka men crept up to a besieged castle in the dark to map its walls, measure the depth of its moats, and steal the defenders' own passwords out of the night. After that, the trade hollowed out. Some became castle guards, some ran fire patrols in the crowded wooden cities, A handful served the shogun's own intelligence service, quietly watching the roads and the noble houses. But most of them simply became again what their ancestors had been, farmers in a quiet valley, their deadly craft dissolving, year by year, into stories told by firelight. And here, not on any battlefield, is where the ninja you actually know was born. In the theaters of Edo, the popular kabuki plays needed stagehands to move scenery and props in full view of the audience without breaking the spell of the drama. So those stagehands dressed head to toe in black, and they were called kuroko, and by a kind of silent agreement, the entire audience simply pretended they could not see them. On that stage, a man dressed in black meant one thing. This person is invisible. This person is not here. So when a playwright wanted a character to appear out of nowhere, strike, and be gone, the perfect costume was already standing right there in the wings. They dressed the assassin in the outfit that meant unseen. The earliest picture we have of a ninja in that now famous black hood dates to around the year 1800, long after the real shinobi were gone. The same theaters handed the ninja his throwing stars. They took a real-life bandit from history and rewrote him on stage as a ninja. They built the whole costume piece by piece out of pure entertainment. Centuries later, it only grew. A wave of novels in the 1950s gave every fictional ninja a secret, almost magical power. The films that followed bolted on the rest. The Black Hood, the Flying Shuriken, the Clashing Clans in the Night. And finally a comic about a young ninja named Naruto sold more than 250 million copies and carried that entirely invented image into every country on Earth. Every single piece of the ninja in your head, the mask, the stars, the rooftop killer, the vanishing cloud of smoke, traces back not to the mountains of Iga, but to a theater's prop crew and the writers who came after them. So the next time the image rises in your mind, remember what you are really looking at. A stagehand's costume, a symbol whose original meaning was, quite literally, pretend I am not here. The real shinobi wore a farmer's coat and a monk's deep hat. They did not so much fight in the darkness as disappear into daylight. Their single finest skill was never being seen, and it worked so completely that when the wars ended and the storytellers took over, history itself lost sight of them. The men who spent their whole lives making certain that no one would ever remember their faces got precisely what they trained for. We built a legend loud enough to fill the silence they left behind. And it is the wrong legend. The real ninja is still out there in the record, half erased, slipping past a checkpoint, waiting in the margin of somebody else's chronicle, still moving unseen. Even now, 400 years later, we are looking straight at them, and we still cannot see them at all.